The rogue quietly strides ahead of the party, all senses on alert for any threat. And all of a sudden, his foot catches on the ground. Looking down, he sees an eye gazing up at him from the floor as a mouth forms out of the ground beneath him, ready to devour him. Welcome to Many Adventures Mini. This week I did some crafting and kit bashing to put together a custom monster. This horrific monstrosity, a floor mimic. I got my inspiration to build this thing off of the Tabletop Crafters Guild's April Challenge Build competition. The challenge for the competition was to put together some sort of hazard for my D&D party, and I had to use foam at some point in the construction. That gave me the idea to put together this floor mimic that's pretending to be a section of the floor in some dungeon, so I crafted it to match my set of dungeon tiles that I made in the style of Black Magic Craft. So let's go on and I'll show you how I put this one together. Alright, so to start off with on this piece, I used my Proxxon hot wire table cutter in order to get myself a 1/2 inch thick, 3 inch by 3 inch square so that it would match my current set of dungeon tiles that I made a while ago in the style of Black Magic Crafts. Once I have my square, I used my guide fence set at 1 inch to quickly burn a grid into the foam, making sure to continue the lines down the side of the tile as well. Now that I have my basic tile, I take some balled up aluminum foil and I roll it around on the surface of the foam. This roughens it up a bit and gives me a better stone texture. I also come in here with a pen and quickly carve out a few cracked tiles in order to simulate an old neglected looking area. In order to make this mimic's mouth look like it's forming up out of the stone tile, I use the Proxxon table again to carefully cut out the center square of my tile. Once I have that part cut out, I eyeball a shallow depth with my guide fence and cut the top and bottom off of the section. Then, using some hot glue, I reattach the bottom in place where it was before and attach the top part up at an angle, almost like it's rising up, kind of like a trapdoor. This is the part where I started kit bashing. I pulled out some leftover sprues from some Warhammer demons I'd bought a long time ago. I thought they seemed perfect for this application, with all these rows of spiky bits that just seemed perfect for using as teeth in this application, and I loved the way that it turned out looking. When attaching the teeth from the modeling kit, I decided to go with hot glue since when it dried, it should look like fleshy gums at the base of the teeth. I played around a little bit with the teeth, trying to decide how I wanted it to go, but in the end, I think it came out looking pretty good. I had to fiddle around with it a little bit here and there with some tweezers in order to get everything sitting just how I wanted it. I also use a bit here that I think was originally supposed to be something's tail, but in this application, it just looked perfect as a thin, spiky tongue to go in my mimic's mouth, and it's honestly kind of terrifying. In order to make the eyes, I grabbed some 8mm steel balls I had lying around, and they seemed to be just the right size, and they should add a decent amount of weight to my final piece since foam is relatively light. I placed the balls around where I wanted them and then pressed them into the foam so that they left a little bit of an indent so they wouldn't roll around. Afterwards, I came in with my hot glue gun, and this time I actually used the hot nozzle of the glue gun in order to melt away some of the foam, and then I began filling in that area with hot glue, and I placed the balls on there and started building up around the sides of it in order to get that eye shape. Then I took some thin tentacle pieces from my sprue, and using just a dab of hot glue, I set them in the foam. After these had set up, I did decide to come back to these and make the bases of the tentacles bigger, since I thought that it would make it look a bit better. Unfortunately, as usually happens when working with hot glue, I did have to spend a decent amount of time cleaning up wispy strands of glue with my tweezers, but overall it wasn't too bad. Before I could start painting, I needed to seal up the foam on my project, so I borrowed a technique from Black Magic Craft and I used some Mod Podge mixed with black paint. And I just brushed this all over the foam parts of the project in order to protect it, including a solid coat along the back. After the Mod Podge dried, I also needed to prime up the plastic and glue parts of the project, so I loaded up my airbrush with my Vallejo surface primer and gave it a solid coating. Now it's on to paint. I start by loading up my palette with some Craftsmart dark gray and deep gray. I give all the stone textured sections a base coat in the deep gray, applying it in 2 or 3 thin coats in order to get it to flow well into all the cracks and recesses. That base coat has dried and I've gotten all the coverage that I want out of it. I pull out my 3 red colors from Army Painter. I'm using Crusted Soar, Dragon Red, and Pure Red today. Starting with the Crusted Soar, I applied it in thin layers to the areas of glue and plastic until I reached the opacity that I was looking for. And not waiting for that paint to dry, I go in with the Dragon Red, applying it with a blend in order to bring the color of the fleshy bits up higher. And I go on to repeat this process again with the Pure Red. After this, I return to my Craftsmart dark gray color and I apply it with a dry brush to all the stone textured areas. Next, I do one last light dry brushing using the Craftsmart suede color on all of the stone textured areas. Heading up for more work on the eyes, I use an Army Painter Mummy Robes color in order to paint in the whites of the eyes for my little beastie. While I let the eyes dry, I move on and use Army Painter's Skeleton Bone color in order to paint all the teeth and spiky bits on the tongue. And once that's done, I return to the eyes with the Army Painter matte black color in order to paint in the pupils. With the pupils, I decided to go with a slit pupil since in this situation, it just seemed appropriate. As an additional small touch, I decided to water down some of the Crusted Soar color into a quick wash that I used to fill in the stone cracks to give a bit of an impression of flesh peeking out beneath the stone. Once everything had dried up, I used my homemade wash in order to apply a light brown onto all of the bone colors in order to yellow them up and make them look a bit more realistic. And in all the other places, I give it all a thorough coating in my homemade black wash. Since my homemade wash dries very glossy, I decided to use my Vallejo matte varnish with my airbrush in order to come in and tone down all of the shine. However, some of the areas I did like the glossy look, so I did go back over all of the fleshy bits in order to hit them with a gloss varnish in order to make them appear very shiny and wet. And here is a look at the final piece. I'm not going to lie, the concept here combined with the actual piece is straight nightmare fuel for me, and I think I might have nightmares about being eaten by the floor for the next few days. But that's not going to stop me from surprising my players with this guy when they least expect it. Alright, thank you guys for watching. If you have any feedback, please put it down in the comments section. If you're interested in purchasing some of the miniatures that I paint, I do put some of the miniatures that I paint on the channel up for sale on my Etsy store, and there's a link to that down in the description. If you've enjoyed watching, please go ahead and hit that like button. If you want to see more of my videos, go ahead and subscribe, and I'll see you guys all again here next week.